Hello everyone, part 2 of chapter 1, Rise of Nationalism in Europe. In part 1, in previous lecture, we discussed about Frédéric Souriau. He was a French artist, and we discussed about figure 1.1 given in your NCERT in the beginning of your chapter. Today we are going to discuss about the pages number 5, 6 and 7. And just to remind you that Statue of Liberty, Frédéric Souriau, all these are there in figure 1.1. The concept of Frédéric Souriau, that was a dream of social and democratic republic. The image that was shown, that was known as the Utopian Vision, because there were so many things like Christ, angels gazing upon the scene from the heavens above, and how he said, Frédéric Souriau told them that this is only because so that people could march in a disciplined way because God is gazing upon them. We discussed about the nation state, we discussed about the meaning of nation state, that it is modern state, having a well-defined territory. In a modern state, people are together with a feeling of common identity or common culture. People have a well-defined territory and the government is sovereign. And mostly these countries are republics, which means that heads of the states are not hereditary, but they are popularly elected by the people. We also discussed previously that there were certain measures that were adopted by the French revolutionaries to create a sense of collective belonging among the people of France. All the custom duties and dues were abolished. There was economic growth and development in the country, and France became a nation state. Although further developments will be there, which we are going to study in this chapter, but finally in 1789, it was the first expression of republican revolution in France. We also discussed, students, about the Jacobin clubs, which were the groups, the clubs formed by the educated middle classes to pave the way to the French armies to enter in parts of Holland, Switzerland, much part of Italy, and conquer the rest of Europe and carry the idea of nationalism forward. After that, we discussed about the Napoleonic Code, in which there was inviolability of private property and remarkable changes in the administrative field were brought. Guild restrictions were totally abolished, and feudalism and serfdom were also abolished, and France truly became a nation state because there was economic growth, overall development. But three things made Napoleon, very soon Napoleon became unpopular among the people. I told you that in the beginning, after the Napoleonic Code was implemented, the new businessman class and the professionals, they all welcomed French armies as the harbinger of liberty. But after some time, people said openly, it was told that actually Napoleon has destroyed democracy in France. And although you know that in the administrative field, he incorporated remarkable changes, but three things made him unpopular. The first was increased taxation, because to maintain a huge army, he imposed taxes on the people, and nobody likes increase in taxes. Second was forced conscription into the army, the compulsory military training for children. That was also not liked by the people, and it went against Napoleon. And then strict censorship. Napoleon declared in his regime that nothing will be written against Napoleon. Nobody will criticize anything which is going on under Napoleon as he was conquering the rest of Europe. There will be no criticism, and whatever will be written in the press, in the newspapers, in media, that would be written in favor of Napoleon only. And you all know that freedom of press is a pillar of democracy. We also noticed that although remarkable changes were brought in administration, but actually right to vote was limited, and it was given only to the propertied males. All the females and all the unpropertied males, they were deprived of right to vote. So actual democracy was destroyed. So Napoleon, who brought changes in France that were liked by the people previously, but these three things, increased taxation and censorship and forced conscription, it overweighed the advantages of the administrative changes that were brought by Napoleon. Means these three things, they overweighed it. Okay, people forgot about the advantages of the administrative changes and administrative reforms, but they only remembered that all these drawbacks are there in Napoleon's administration. So very soon he became unpopular. You can see your NCERT page number 6, 7 and 8, all these things are given. Now we switch over to a new topic today, that is making of nationalism in Europe. Making of nationalism in Europe is really an adverse event. Generally, we say that nationalism develops because some foreign countries, some foreign powers enter into an area, into a regime, and people develop a sense of nationalism because they wanted to get freedom from them, like we did in India. But making of nationalism in Europe is a totally different story, because this was the period when two empires, Habsburg Empire and Bourbon dynasties, were ruling over. We have discussed it in the first lecture also. And there were these empires, there were kingdoms, there were empires were patchwork of kingdoms. Means under one empire there were patches. There were so many people having different cultures, different ethnicity. Even they spoke different languages, and nothing was binding them together. And the countries were divided into kingdoms, duchies and cantons. And everywhere there were autonomous bodies, everywhere people had their own autonomous organizations. So, even the language groups were totally different from each other. In one region where people lived, they were not together on the basis of their culture or on the basis of their collective identity. They didn't share a common history or common culture, and actually they didn't share any uniformity. Even the peasants groups were different. Even the workers groups were different. For example, Slovenians, Slovaks, these were the different groups of the peasants. They had their own autonomy. They had their own autonomous bodies. Only one thing was binding the people, that was the common allegiance to the emperor. That is, Habsburg Empire was ruling over Austria, Hungary, much part of Italy. And similarly, the Bourbon dynasty, it was ruling over so many parts, including Spain. So this was going on in Europe. So the thing is that the feeling of nationalism developed among the people of European countries, in the European continent, whatever countries were there, a feeling of nationalism. That is because the educated middle classes, they could realize that if this goes on, there were conservative regimes, there was hereditary system, there were so many other prospects going on, so many other economic and political systems going on, like feudalism, feudal system. In one country there were petty kings, small kings all over. And feudalism, and there was serfdom. It was a class of serfs, landless peasants, because you know that in every society such people are more, their population is more than the others. And as I told you that they all had their own autonomous bodies. For example, in certain areas it was seen that people spoke different languages. In a particular region, Hungary, etc., people spoke Magyar language, which was which did not belong to that particular region. Instead of Hungarian language, they spoke different languages. Different dialects were there, and nothing was common among them. So this was the situation in Europe, that most of the people, the educated elite, the middle class, about which we will talk in the next topic, they realized that no economic development is taking place because there were no uniform currencies and no uniform weights and measures. In one region, there were different currencies, there were different weights and measures. For example, Germany at this time was divided into 39 states. It was a confederation of 39 states, and there were over 30 currencies. And similarly, different weights and measures. So merchants, traders, they did not move from one place to another. So there was no economic development. And even if they moved, it was very complex and it was very complicated, because everywhere they had to take out their goods, get them measured or get them weighed according to the weights and measures of that particular region, and then pay a custom duty according to their currency. I know that when you are hearing all this, even you are finding it very complicated, even you feel that it is very complex and it is very time consuming and also very difficult. So all these circumstances, all these situations, they were responsible for a growth of nationalist feeling among the people of Europe, and certain groups, like we will talk about elites just now. So educated middle classes, they began to feel that if we really want economic development of the country, we want political unification and vice versa. If once there is political unification, it will lead to economic development. As for example, you have seen in France. First of all, there was political unification of the country. The king of the Bourbon dynasty were overthrown. National Assembly took the charge. And we see that after that there was growth of transportation and communication, uniform currency, uniform weights and measures, feudal system, serfdom, they all were abolished. The system that were going on, that were continued from the medieval period. So they were turned out because they were not good for the development of the society, and France became truly a nation state. So similarly, such nationalist feelings arose. They began to take place among the different categories, among the people of European continent, the countries of European continent. Correct? So this was your topic about making of nationalism in Europe. Next we switch over to aristocracy and the middle class. You are asked in 5 marks in your examination, what do you mean by aristocratic class and which new class began to develop in the European society against aristocracy. So let me tell you about aristocratic class. Socially and politically dominant, a class of landed people. Landed aristocracy means they had big estates of land in the countryside, but mostly they lived in the towns. And wherever aristocratic class lived, they spoke French in the high societies, because at that time speaking French language was a status symbol. It was considered to be very a prestigious thing to speak in French. So they spoke French language. Numerically, it was a very small number in the continent. Numerically, they were about 300 to 400 families in the whole European continent, but they cut across regional divisions. They cut across regional divisions means wherever, in whichever European country they lived, they were one. They married their children in their own clan, and they had their social gatherings with each other. So this class was dominant, socially dominant, because in the society their status was up because they were rich. Politically dominant because they were very close to the king, as we have seen in France, privileged class. So aristocracy came in the privileged class. They were deprived of taxes. And this aristocratic class, however, it was very few. Most of the population in the European countries consisted of workers and peasants, particularly the peasantry, the serfs, the landless peasants. And they used to till their land, they used to work on the land of the aristocratic class, and aristocratic class was enjoying privileges. And it was becoming very strong in the society. In fact, they had their separate arrangements, they had their separate, everything separate from the others, because they wanted that people should know that we are aristocratic class, that we have a separate class. Correct? Gradually, after the Industrial Revolution, the next subheading of this topic, aristocratic and the emergence of a new class, that was middle class. So after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was emergence of another class known as the middle class, the class of professionals, particularly the working people, the working class, the lawyers, teachers, all professionals, businessmen, etc. This class emerged, and they could realize that all the productive work for the society we do, and obviously in every country most of the productive work is done by these people, workers, peasants and the professionals, and all the privileges are enjoyed by these aristocratic classes. Moreover, after the Industrial Revolution, many workers, they worked together and they could discuss among themselves that what is going on in the society about the aristocratic class. However, when Industrial Revolution began in England, it started late in central and western part of Europe. It started late because their nation states came up very late, so it began very late. So gradually this class came up, and from this class the ideas of revolutions were formulated, because they came to know that only work is done, the only productive work is done by the middle class, and privileges are enjoyed by the aristocracy sitting at home, because they had big mansions in towns, big mansions, palatial houses in towns, and they lived in luxuries. But all the productive work was done by middle class, and they lived in, they had so many grievances, they lived with so many hardships. So from this class, the idea of nationalism, the idea of liberal nationalism grew, and then there was chain of revolutions in different countries. In the whole chapter, we will look into that this middle class, it was responsible for bringing revolution, for bringing nationalism in different sections of the society at that time. So our next topic will be liberalism or liberal nationalism. What does it mean? What is liberalism? Actually, liberalism or liberal nationalism, it is derived from the word of Latin root liber, L-I-B-E-R, liber meaning free. And this freedom, that is liber, that is liberalism, this freedom consists of two things: political liberalism and economic liberalism. Correct? So whenever you are asked this question, what do you mean by liberal nationalism, you just divide your answer into two parts: political liberalism and economic liberalism. And first of all, clarify, liberalism is a word derived from the Latin root liber meaning free. So according to the educated middle class of that time, it stood for universal adult suffrage. Suffrage, as we know it today, it is universal adult franchise. That is a political right, right to vote. So universal adult suffrage. Now it lays stress on that all the adults, universally means equally, they should be given the right to vote, and they should be allowed, they should be given the right to choose their rulers. So rulers should govern the country with people's consent. We will discuss in the next lecture that how in France, although there was a revolution, and France became a nation state, even then right to vote was limited and it was not given to all. We all know that it was given only to the propertied males. So there was a criticism over it. Then economic liberalism means freedom to the markets, because just now I told you, when the countries were ruled over by the autocratic monarchies, by the conservatives, their rule was based on conventions, means old order, and they were not trying to change themselves. Instead, they hated revolutions. So according to economic liberalism, it is freedom to the market. And how markets will move freely? When there will be uniform currency and there will be uniform weights and measures. So that would lead to economic liberalism. So political liberalism and economic liberalism, these are the two aspects of liberal nationalism. We will discuss all these in detail in the next lecture. Till then, you prepare your notes on pages 5, 6 and 7 and previous notes also. Just complete it. We will meet again with some new lectures, something new for you. Till then, it is a very goodbye from me.